Strip away the romantic framing, the candlelit movie moments, the first date butterflies, and kissing is objectively bizarre. You're pressing your germ-covered face hole against another person's germ-covered face hole, exchanging saliva, bacteria, and whatever they had for lunch. From a purely biological standpoint, it's a disease vector wrapped in sentiment. So where did it come from? Some researchers think it started as mothers chewing food for babies. Others believe it evolved from sniffing potential mates, literally smell-checking someone before committing. The Tonga people of southern Africa reportedly found European kissing disgusting when they first encountered it. They eat each other's saliva and dirt, one observer noted. Tonight, we're tracing how humanity started smashing faces together and why some of us never stopped. Settle in. Before humans kissed, they sniffed. This sounds less romantic than it actually was, though admittedly, the bar for romantic in prehistoric courtship was fairly low. But smell greetings served a genuine purpose. Long before language, long before gifts or poetry or awkward dinner conversations, early humans used their noses to gather information about potential partners. Health, genetic compatibility. Whether this person had recently eaten something that died 3 days ago. The nose knows, as they say. And for most of human history, the nose was doing the heavy lifting in mate selection. Consider how many cultures still greet each other by pressing noses together. The Maori hongi, the Inuit kunik, the traditional greetings across Polynesia and Southeast Asia. These aren't failed attempts at kissing. They're the original technology. You're sharing breath, inhaling the essence of another person, exchanging something invisible but deeply personal. Somewhere along the evolutionary line, some humans decided to move the operation slightly south. The nose-to-nose became nose-to-mouth, then mouth-to-mouth. No one knows exactly when or why. The fossil record is frustratingly silent on soft tissue activities. But the leading theory suggests proximity and sensation simply merged. Once you're that close to someone's face, once you're breathing their air and smelling their skin, the lips become almost accidental. Almost. Because lips are packed with nerve endings. More than almost any other part of the human body. Touch them to something, anything, and your brain lights up like a switchboard. Early humans may have discovered this by accident. Or they may have been deliberately experimenting, the way humans experiment with everything that feels interesting. What we do know is that kissing didn't emerge universally. When anthropologists surveyed 168 cultures in 2015, they found that only 46% practiced romantic mouth-to-mouth kissing. Less than half. The behavior was concentrated in more complex, stratified societies, places with writing, cities, social hierarchies. Simpler foraging societies largely didn't bother. This suggests something uncomfortable for those of us who consider kissing fundamental to romance. It might be cultural technology, not biological instinct. Something humans invented, refined, and spread, like agriculture or organized religion or the concept of weekends. The societies that kissed tended to be the ones that exported their culture most aggressively. European colonizers brought kissing to places that had been doing fine without it. Missionaries taught it alongside scripture. Bollywood and Hollywood broadcast it into living rooms worldwide. The global dominance of kissing cultures made kissing seem universal when it was actually just well marketed. Meanwhile, Cultures that never adopted the practice found the whole thing somewhere between puzzling and revolting. When European explorers first demonstrated kissing to certain indigenous groups, the reaction was visceral disgust. Not because these people lacked affection. They had their own intimacy practices, but because mouth-to-mouth contact seemed unsanitary, invasive, animalistic. Which, if you think about it for more than 3 seconds, it kind of is. But here's the thing about human behavior. Disgust rarely stops us from doing anything we've decided feels good. And kissing, whatever its origins, undeniably feels good. The nerve endings don't lie. There's another theory about kissing's origins. It's less romantic than the smell hypothesis. Considerably less. Before baby food existed, before mashed peas in jars, before pureed carrots, before any of the conveniences modern parents take for granted, human mothers had a problem. Infants needed soft food. Soft food didn't exist in nature unless you made it. And the most efficient food processor available was already attached to your face. Premastication, the technical term for chewing food and then transferring it, mouth to mouth, into your baby's mouth. It sounds grotesque by modern standards. It is grotesque by modern standards. But for most of human history, it was simply how you kept small children alive. Mothers chewed meat, grain, whatever nutrients were available, and then passed the softened result directly to their offspring. Kiss feeding, the original meal prep. This practice persisted far longer than you'd think. Ancient texts reference it. Medieval sources describe it. Some cultures continued it into the 20th century. The mouth-to-mouth transfer wasn't affection. It was survival technology. But survival technology has a way of becoming ritualized. Consider what this experience teaches an infant brain. Mouth-to-mouth contact means food, means mother, means safety, warmth, survival itself. The neural pathways laid down in those earliest months don't distinguish between feeding mechanism and love. They just register, this is good. This person's mouth near my mouth means I will live another day. Some researchers believe kissing is essentially fossilized infant feeding behavior. The physical motion survived long after the nutritional function disappeared. Adults pressing lips together aren't consciously reenacting premastication. That would be unsettling on a first date. But their brains might still be running ancient software that associates the gesture with comfort and connection. The evidence is circumstantial but intriguing. The way humans kiss, tilting heads, opening mouths slightly, often involving tongue, mirrors the mechanics of kiss feeding more than it mirrors nose greeting or smell checking. The deep kiss, the one romantics prize most highly, is biomechanically similar to food transfer. Make of that what you will. This theory also explains why kissing feels nurturing rather than purely sexual. Why a kiss on the forehead communicates care. Why kissing someone's tears away registers as comfort. The original context was caregiving, not courtship. Somewhere along the line, humans repurposed the machinery. Not everyone finds this explanation satisfying. It strips the romance from romance, reduces intimacy to nutrition logistics. But human behavior is rarely as elevated as we'd like to believe. Most of our rituals started as something practical. Handshakes began as weapon checks, clinking glasses began as poison tests. The beautiful meanings we attach now are aftermarket additions. Kissing might be pre-chewed food with better PR. And somehow, knowing that doesn't make it feel any less meaningful when it happens. The origins don't diminish the experience. They just remind us that humans are very good at building poetry out of survival. So when did humans first kiss? The honest answer is, we have no idea. Kissing doesn't fossilize. Lips decompose. Romantic gestures leave no archaeological trace. We can date the first stone tools, the first fires, the first burials. But the first kiss vanished the moment it ended, leaving nothing behind but whatever the participants felt about it. What we have instead are representations, art, writing. The moment humans decided kissing was worth recording. For decades, the standard answer pointed to India. The Vedic Sanskrit texts, composed around 1500 BCE, contain what many scholars consider the earliest written references to kissing. The texts describe lovers setting mouth to mouth, which is about as explicit as ancient religious literature gets. Later Indian texts elaborated enthusiastically. The Kama Sutra, composed sometime between 400 BCE and 200 CE, dedicates entire chapters to kissing techniques, categorizing them with the systematic precision of a bureaucrat cataloging office supplies. But recent discoveries push the timeline back further, much further. In 2023, researchers announced that Mesopotamian clay tablets, those dense, unglamorous blocks of cuneiform that scholars had been squinting at for generations, contained kissing references dating to 2500 BCE, a full 1,000 years before the Vedic texts. The ancient Sumerians and Babylonians, it turns out, were documenting mouth-to-mouth contact while the Indus Valley civilization was still figuring out urban planning. The Mesopotamian references aren't romantic poetry. They're more clinical. Descriptions of the act appearing in various contexts, some ritualistic, some erotic, some seemingly casual. But their existence proves that kissing was already established, already normal enough to write about in one of humanity's earliest literate civilizations. This doesn't mean Mesopotamians invented kissing. It means they wrote it down first. The behavior almost certainly predates any writing system by thousands of years. But without records, we're guessing. What the Mesopotamian tablets do suggest is that kissing emerged independently in multiple places, or spread very early through trade and migration routes. The ancient Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, eventually the Mediterranean world, all developed kissing cultures that cross-pollinated through commerce and conquest. The Greeks kissed. The Romans really kissed. They had 3 different words for it, distinguishing between the friendly peck, the affectionate kiss, and the passionate variety. Roman poets wrote about kissing with an enthusiasm that borders on obsessive. Catullus famously demanded thousands of kisses from his lover Lesbia, then thousands more, then so many that neither of them could count, specifically so that enemies couldn't curse them by knowing the exact number. Ancient kissing had superstitious weight. It sealed contracts. It transferred blessing. It could bind souls or curse them. The kiss wasn't just physical contact. It was exchange, transaction, a moment when something invisible passed between people. By the time Christianity emerged, the kiss was already loaded with meaning, which is why early Christians immediately complicated it further. The holy kiss became a ritual greeting among believers, mentioned repeatedly in the New Testament. Church fathers spent centuries debating the appropriate context for kissing and whether mouths should actually touch or merely approach. The anxiety is almost endearing. Meanwhile, across much of Africa, the Pacific, the pre-colonial Americas, and indigenous Australia, romantic kissing remained largely unknown. These weren't less affectionate cultures. They simply expressed intimacy differently. The global spread of kissing behavior tracks almost perfectly with the global spread of certain civilizations. Kissing, it seems, is a cultural habit that traveled with empires. When Charles Darwin traveled the world collecting observations for what would become his theory of evolution, he also collected data on human customs, including kissing. His findings were uncomfortable for Victorian sensibilities. Kissing is unknown among the New Zealanders, Tahitians, Papuans, and Australian Aborigines, Darwin noted. Similar reports came from Africa, the Americas, various Pacific islands. The assumption that all humans naturally kiss was, Darwin realized, simply wrong. But here's what makes the research genuinely interesting. When exposed to European-style kissing, many non-kissing cultures didn't adopt it immediately. They were repulsed. The Tsonga people of southern Africa, when missionaries demonstrated the practice, reportedly described it as eating each other's saliva and dirt. The reaction wasn't prudishness. These were cultures with their own intimate practices, some far more explicit than a kiss. It was genuine disgust at the mechanics. Why would you put your mouth where someone else's mouth has been? When you think about it, the disgust makes sense. Mouths are not clean spaces. They harbor bacteria, remnants of food, whatever particles happen to be floating in the air. Sharing mouth contact means sharing all of that. From a hygiene standpoint, the non-kissers had a point. The Mahinaku people of Brazil found the whole concept confusing as well as unpleasant. When anthropologist Thomas Gregor studied their culture in the 1970s, informants described kissing as gross and couldn't understand why anyone would want to do it. They had their own elaborate courtship practices, just none that involved direct mouth contact. Japan offers a more nuanced case. Traditional Japanese culture recognized kissing but treated it as intensely private, far more intimate than it appeared in Western contexts. Public kissing was essentially non-existent until Western influence in the 20th century. The concept existed. The cultural rules around it were simply different. This matters because it challenges something many people take for granted. That romantic kissing is natural, instinctive, hardwired into human biology. If it were truly instinctive, all humans would do it. They don't. The behavior has to be learned, demonstrated, culturally transmitted. What appears to be instinctive is the desire for physical closeness during bonding. The touching, the holding, the proximity. How that closeness expresses itself varies wildly. Nuzzling, sniffing, breathing together, pressing foreheads, stroking hair. Humans around the world have developed dozens of intimacy practices. Kissing is just one option. an option that happened to belong to the cultures that built ships, wrote dictionaries, and made movies. When Hollywood romanticizes kissing, when Disney movies make the kiss the climax of the love story, when wedding ceremonies formalize "you may kiss the bride," these are cultural choices, not biological imperatives. The non-kissing cultures that found the practice disgusting weren't missing something fundamental. They were experiencing the same reaction anyone might have to an unfamiliar intimacy practice. The globalization of kissing is really the globalization of a particular set of cultures. The behavior spread because power spread. And now it feels universal because the people who do it control most of the world's media. Somewhere there's probably a teenager in a culture that adopted kissing through colonial contact, experiencing their first awkward romantic kiss, and assuming this is how humans have always done things. They're participating in a tradition that would have baffled their great-great-grandparents. That's not a tragedy. It's just history. Let's talk about what kissing actually does to you. Biologically, chemically. The internal machinery that fires when mouth meets mouth. Because even if kissing is culturally transmitted rather than instinctive, once you're doing it, your body has very strong opinions about the experience. First, the lips. Human lips are extraordinarily sensitive, packed with nerve endings that rank them among the most touch-responsive tissues in the body. The scientific term is disproportionate cortical representation, meaning the brain devotes far more processing power to lip sensations than the lip's small size would suggest. Touch your finger to something and then touch your lip to the same thing. The lip version will feel dramatically more intense. This sensitivity isn't an accident. It evolved for eating, testing food temperature, texture, potential danger. But evolution is lazy and efficient. Once the hardware exists, it gets repurposed. Lips sensitive enough to detect a too hot berry are also sensitive enough to make kissing neurologically significant. When two people kiss, their brains release a cocktail of chemicals that would make a pharmacologist nervous. Dopamine surges, creating feelings of pleasure and reward. The same neurotransmitter that fires during drug use, gambling, and eating chocolate. Oxytocin floods the system, the so-called bonding hormone that promotes attachment and trust. Serotonin levels shift, cortisol drops, adrenaline spikes briefly before settling. The effect is essentially intoxication. A biochemical state designed to make you want to keep doing whatever you just did. Simultaneously, kissing transfers information. Biological information. When you kiss someone, you're sampling their microbiome, their hormones, their immune markers. Research suggests humans may unconsciously assess genetic compatibility through kissing. The mysterious chemistry people describe when a kiss feels right or wrong. You're running a compatibility test disguised as affection. Women may be especially attuned to this. Studies have found that women place more importance on kissing as a mate assessment tool, rating it as more crucial to attraction than men do. The hypothesis: since women historically bore higher costs for reproductive choices, pregnancy, nursing, prolonged childcare, they evolved more rigorous screening mechanisms. Kissing might be one of them. This would explain why a bad kiss can kill attraction instantly. It's not just technique. It's that your body received incompatibility data and made a recommendation. Heart rates synchronize during extended kissing. Breathing patterns align. Brain activity in both partners begins to mirror each other. Two separate nervous systems start moving toward coordination, as if practicing for the cooperation that long-term bonding requires. None of this explains why kissing started, but it might explain why it stuck. Once humans discovered they could trigger this biochemical cascade by pressing lips together, the behavior reinforced itself. The cultures that adopted kissing experienced its rewards and kept doing it. The practice spread because it worked, not practically like a tool, but emotionally like a drug. Kissing might be cultural, but the high is biological. Here's the uncomfortable truth that romantics prefer to ignore. Kissing is a spectacularly efficient way to transmit disease. A single kiss can transfer over 80 million bacteria between partners. Not a typo. 80 million. Mouth-to-mouth contact exchanges saliva, which contains whatever pathogens either person happens to be carrying. Herpes simplex, mononucleosis, cytomegalovirus, strep bacteria, cold viruses. The list of things that spread through kissing reads like a medical school exam. And yet humans keep doing it. In cultures that kiss, people accept these risks as background noise, the minor cost of intimacy. We rarely think about the biological exchange happening during a romantic moment. The chemicals flooding our brains specifically prevent that kind of calculating analysis. Evolution might have a reason for this trade-off. Some researchers theorize that kissing serves as a deliberate disease-sharing mechanism, not a bug but a feature. By exchanging pathogens early in a relationship, partners synchronize their immune systems. They develop similar antibody profiles. If they later have children, those children benefit from parents who've already built immunity to shared environmental threats. This sounds like evolution making a careful investment. Accept small infections now in exchange for reproductive benefits later. The logic is cold but mathematically sound, assuming you survive the infections. History, however, shows that the risks weren't always small. When European explorers and colonizers contacted indigenous populations who had no kissing tradition, they sometimes introduced the practice along with catastrophic diseases. Populations that had never exchanged saliva with outsiders had no immunity to saliva-borne pathogens. The kiss itself became a vector for broader epidemiological disaster. This wasn't intentional biological warfare, most of the time. It was simply what happens when a disease-sharing custom meets a population unprepared for those specific diseases. The kiss carried pathogens that had been circulating in Eurasian populations for centuries, against which Europeans had developed partial immunity. Indigenous peoples had no such protection. In modern contexts, kissing-related disease transmission is mostly manageable. Cold sores flare up, mono spreads through college dorms, respiratory viruses catch rides from lip to lip. Annoying but rarely fatal. Public health authorities don't typically campaign against kissing. The behavior is too entrenched, the benefits too psychologically important. But during pandemic conditions, the calculus shifts. COVID ID 19, reminded many people that mouth-to-mouth contact involves respiratory exchange. Some couples stopped kissing during infection peaks. Public health messaging occasionally, awkwardly, suggested limiting intimate contact with people outside your household. The advice felt almost impossible to follow for anyone in a new relationship. The biochemical pull toward kissing doesn't negotiate with epidemiology. We accept the disease risk because we've decided kissing is worth it. That's not rational. It's human. Everyone who kisses remembers their first time, usually with a mixture of nostalgia and secondhand embarrassment. The first kiss is almost always terrible. Noses collide, lips miss their targets, teeth bump together with a sound nobody wants to hear. The head tilt that seems so natural in movies requires split-second coordination that inexperienced kissers haven't developed. Someone goes left when they should go right. Someone opens their mouth too soon or not soon enough. The whole thing feels less like a romantic awakening and more like a geometry problem neither party studied for. This awkwardness reveals something important. Kissing really is learned behavior. If it were purely instinctive, first kisses would be smooth. Bodies would know what to do. Instead, humans fumble through it, building skill gradually, learning from each clumsy attempt what works and what doesn't. Teenagers practice. They talk to friends, compare notes, gather intelligence. They watch movies with exaggerated attention to how the actors position their faces. They rehearse on their own hands, pillows, any available surface that won't judge them. The effort that goes into learning to kiss suggests it's not natural at all. It's a performance that requires instruction. This is true across cultures. Even in societies where kissing is universal, each generation has to acquire the skill from scratch. The behavior doesn't transmit genetically. It transmits socially through observation, imitation, trial and error, and the feedback of partners willing to tolerate learning curves. Which means every human kissing tradition descended from someone who figured it out first. Someone, somewhere, thousands of years ago, moved from nose greeting or smell checking to lip contact, and liked it enough to do it again. Their partners either agreed or didn't. The ones who agreed taught their friends. The behavior spread, refined, developed conventions. The awkward first kiss is really a recapitulation of that entire history. Each teenager reinventing the wheel, discovering through experience what generations before them discovered, that this feels good, that this connects people, that the vulnerability of getting it wrong is part of what makes getting it right meaningful. The fumbling isn't a failure. It's the process working exactly as designed. By the time someone becomes a confident kisser, they've forgotten how strange the learning period felt. They kiss automatically now without thinking about head angles or pressure or timing. The skill that once required conscious effort has become unconscious. Just like whoever invented it probably intended. The ancient world had a lot of opinions about kissing, not all of them romantic. In ancient Rome, kissing was categorized, regulated, and argued about with the thoroughness Romans brought to everything. The osculum was a kiss of friendship or greeting, delivered on the cheek or lips as a social gesture. The basium was the kiss of affection, warmer but still appropriate for public display. The savium was the passionate kiss, the one reserved for lovers, the one respectable people theoretically kept private. Romans kissed constantly in social contexts. They kissed family members, friends, political allies. They kissed to seal agreements, demonstrate loyalty, signal membership in certain circles. The kiss wasn't just affection. It was communication, a physical vocabulary that everyone understood. This created problems. If everyone is kissing everyone, how do you know which kisses mean something? Roman literature is full of complaints about obligatory kissing, the social pressure to offer mouth contact to people you'd rather avoid. Martial, the satirist, wrote with obvious disgust about being expected to kiss people with bad breath, diseases, or simply insufferable personalities. The custom had become a burden. The Romans also worried about disease transmission centuries before germ theory. Emperor Tiberius reportedly banned kissing in public during an outbreak of skin disease that spread through facial contact. He couldn't stop people from kissing. The social pressure was too strong, but he tried to limit the damage. Ancient Greece had different conventions. The Greeks kissed, but with more restraint than the Romans. Kissing wasn't central to their public ritual life the way it became in Rome. Aristotle wrote about kissing as something natural, part of human affection, but not the obsessive cultural fixture it would later become. Greek art shows kissing rarely. Roman art shows it everywhere. The difference suggests the behavior intensified over time, becoming more socially mandatory, more loaded with meaning, more impossible to avoid. In ancient Persia, the rules were even more complex. Herodotus, the Greek historian, described Persian kissing customs with the fascination of an outsider. Equals kissed on the lips, slight social inferiors received cheek kisses, and those significantly lower in status received no kiss at all, only a bow from the superior. The kiss was a status marker, a visible display of where you stood in the hierarchy. This hierarchical kissing spread throughout the ancient Middle East. It appeared in Jewish custom, in early Christian practice, in various court rituals that formalized who could kiss whom and how. The behavior became political, a tool of power and submission as much as affection. By the time Christianity emerged, the kiss was already dangerous. Early Christians practiced the holy kiss as a sign of fellowship, a physical demonstration of community bonds that transcended social barriers. But church leaders quickly grew anxious. What if the holy kiss became too holy? What if it crossed lines? What if men and women kissed each other and felt something besides spiritual brotherhood? The debates filled centuries. Some churches segregated sexes during the kiss of peace. Others replaced mouth contact with kisses on cheeks, hands, religious objects. The anxiety never fully resolved, because the kiss carried too many meanings to control. What the ancient world reveals is that kissing has always been contested territory. Never just personal. Always political, social, religious. The lips that touch carry the weight of every system that regulates them. Here's something you've never consciously noticed. Most people tilt their heads to the right when they kiss. Not all people, but most. Studies consistently find that 60 to 80% of kissing adults instinctively angle their heads rightward as they lean in. The preference appears cross-cultural, showing up in research conducted in Europe, the Americas, and South Asia. Something beyond social convention is happening. The leading explanation involves brain lateralization. The right side of the face is controlled by the left hemisphere of the brain, which in most people processes approach-oriented emotions. Love, affection, the desire to connect. Tilting right might reflect the brain's preference for leading with its emotionally dominant side. Another theory points to fetal development. Most babies in the womb prefer turning their heads to the right. This preference persists after birth, influencing everything from how infants nurse to which direction they turn during sleep. Kissing might simply continue a pattern established before we were born. There's also the practical issue of noses. Human noses stick out. When two faces approach each other, the noses will collide unless heads tilt in compatible directions. Tilting the same direction, both right or both left, works better than tilting toward each other. The right side preference might be nothing more than an arbitrary convention that became self-reinforcing. Once most people tilted right, anyone tilting left started bumping noses more often. Whatever the cause, the pattern offers evidence that kissing involves deep neurological processes beyond conscious control. You don't decide which way to tilt. Your brain decides for you, faster than thought, drawing on preferences laid down in infancy or before. This automatic quality appears throughout kissing behavior. The release of bonding hormones isn't voluntary. The heart rate synchronization isn't something you can force. The feeling of rightness or wrongness when kissing someone new emerges from systems you can't access consciously. The experience of kissing, that sense that something profound is happening, that you're connecting at a level words can't reach, might simply be your awareness of all these unconscious processes firing simultaneously. The brain knows what it wants. It just doesn't bother telling you why. You tilt right because your brain said so. Good luck changing that. Kissing has become an industry, not just a behavior, a product, a performance, a billion-dollar content category. Consider how often kissing appears in media. Movies build toward the kiss. Television series tease it for entire seasons. Romance novels describe it with Baroque detail. Advertising uses it to sell everything from toothpaste to automobiles. The kiss has become visual shorthand for desire, connection, success. A symbol so overloaded with meaning that it barely requires context. This wasn't always true. Early cinema struggled with kissing. The first on-screen kiss in 1896 lasted 18 seconds and scandalized audiences. The Hays Code, which regulated Hollywood from 1934 to 1968, imposed strict rules on kissing. Limited duration, no horizontal positions, no suggestions of tongue. The kiss was simultaneously essential to romance stories and dangerous enough to require constant supervision. When restrictions lifted, Hollywood compensated enthusiastically. Kisses became longer, wetter, more explicit. The camera lingered where it once cut away. Actors developed techniques for simulating passion while maintaining professional boundaries. The screen kiss became a specialized skill, distinct from actual kissing, optimized for angles and lighting rather than genuine connection. This has consequences for how real people understand kissing. When your primary reference for romantic behavior comes from performances designed to look good on camera, you might develop unrealistic expectations for what kissing should feel like. The movie kiss doesn't bump noses or exchange saliva or require breaks for breath. It flows perfectly from first contact to fade out. Real kissing is messier, wetter, sometimes awkward. The face-smashing reality competes with the airbrushed ideal, and the ideal usually wins in memory. People feel disappointed when their kisses don't match the imagined standard, not realizing the standard was never achievable to begin with. Dating culture now organizes itself around the kiss as milestone. First date kissing debates generate endless content. Is it too soon, too late, too forward, too cold? The kiss has become a test, a threshold that determines relationship viability. Couples who kiss on the first date, the thinking goes, might be more or less compatible than couples who wait. The kiss carries predictive weight it probably shouldn't. Meanwhile, the economics of kissing expand into stranger territory. Professional kissing coaches charge hundreds of dollars to teach technique. Kissing compatibility appears as a filter on dating apps. Businesses sell products designed to improve kissing breath, lip texture, overall kissability. The market found the vulnerability in human connection and monetized it. None of this is necessarily harmful. People have always sought help with romance, always wanted to perform intimacy better. But the scale and explicitness of the modern kiss industry reveals how far the behavior has traveled from whatever biological or cultural origin it began with. Kissing is now content, commodity, competition. Somewhere underneath all that, presumably, it's still also connection. But you might have to work to find it. The Great Wall of China is the largest construction project in human history. It stretches across mountains, deserts, grasslands, and river valleys. At its peak extent, including all branches and secondary walls, it covered more than 13,000 miles. Millions of workers labored across centuries to build it. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, died in the process. It didn't stop a single major invasion. Let that settle for a moment. The most ambitious defensive structure ever conceived, the one visible from satellites, the one that appears on every list of human achievements, the one tourists travel thousands of miles to photograph. It failed at its primary purpose. Spectacularly. Almost every time it was actually tested. The Mongols breached it. The Manchus breached it. Various nomadic confederations breached it throughout history with a consistency that suggests the wall was less an obstacle than an inconvenience. When invaders wanted in, they got in. The wall slowed them down occasionally. It stopped them almost never. So why did China keep building it? That's the interesting question. Not how was the Great Wall constructed? That story is well documented, impressive, and exactly as brutal as you'd expect from a project that consumed human lives like fuel. The interesting question is why generations of emperors poured resources into something that demonstrably didn't work. Why engineers kept extending a system that kept failing. Why the wall became a symbol of Chinese civilization when Chinese civilization kept getting conquered despite it. The answer involves politics, economics, symbolism, and a healthy dose of bureaucratic momentum. The Great Wall wasn't primarily a military installation. It was a jobs program, a tax system, a statement of imperial ambition, and a very expensive way to pretend you were doing something about a problem you couldn't actually solve. Tonight, we're dismantling the myth of the impenetrable barrier. We're looking at what the wall actually did and didn't do, and why it kept getting built anyway. We're examining the gap between what monuments symbolize and what they accomplish. Because here's the uncomfortable truth about grand defensive projects. They're often more about the people building them than the threats they're supposedly blocking. They make citizens feel protected. They make rulers look powerful. They provide employment, collect taxes, demonstrate control over territory. Whether they actually work is almost secondary. The Great Wall worked beautifully as a symbol. As a wall? Not so much. The watchtowers crumbled. The soldiers froze at their posts. The bureaucrats stamped their paperwork. And the invaders rode around, climbed over, bribed their way through, or simply waited until internal Chinese politics made the wall irrelevant. This is the story of the most magnificent failure ever constructed. Settle in. First, let's correct a common misconception. There was no single Great Wall. The image most people carry, a continuous stone barrier snaking across mountain ridges, represents only a fraction of what the Great Wall actually means. What existed was a sprawling, inconsistent, century-spanning network of walls, trenches, watchtowers, garrison stations, and natural barriers that different dynasties built, abandoned, rebuilt, extended, and neglected according to their particular needs and resources. The earliest walls date back over 2,000 years to the Warring States period when Chinese kingdoms built fortifications against each other as much as against northern nomads. When Qin Shi Huang unified China in 221 BCE, he connected some of these existing walls into a longer system. But even his famous construction was mud and tamped earth, not the stone tourist attraction that exists today. That stone wall, the photogenic one, is mostly Ming Dynasty work from the 1400s and 1500s CE. The Ming rebuilt and extended previous fortifications with better materials and more sophisticated engineering. They added the watchtowers, the crenellations, the aesthetic features that make the wall look impressive in photographs. When you visit the Great Wall today, you're largely seeing a structure that's only 5 or 6 centuries old. Ancient by most standards, but relatively recent in Chinese history. Between these major building periods, the wall existed in various states of completion and decay. Some dynasties maintained it obsessively. Others let it crumble, preferring different strategies for managing the northern frontier. The wall was never a fixed, permanent thing. It was a policy choice that different rulers made differently. And the construction itself was exactly as brutal as the scale suggests. Workers were conscripted from across the empire. peasants, criminals, soldiers, anyone the state could compel to labor. They worked in extreme conditions. Mountain passes where winter killed exposed workers, deserts where water had to be hauled for miles, swamps where disease spread faster than construction progressed. The bodies became part of the wall. This isn't metaphor. Those who died during construction were sometimes buried in the foundations, their remains incorporated into the structure they'd been building. Archaeologists have found human bones embedded in wall sections. The Great Wall is literally built on corpses. Estimates of total deaths vary wildly, from hundreds of thousands to over 1 million. Because record-keeping was inconsistent and the construction spanned so many centuries. But every estimate is horrifying. The wall consumed human lives the way it consumed stone and labor, voraciously, continuously, without apparent limit. All of this suffering created something impressive. The engineering achievements were real. Moving materials to mountaintops, coordinating labor across thousands of miles, maintaining garrison networks in hostile terrain. These required sophisticated logistics and genuine expertise. The people who built the wall weren't fools. They were solving difficult problems with the tools available. The question isn't whether the wall was an achievement. It was. The question is whether the achievement accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish. The answer is complicated. To understand why the wall failed, you have to understand what it was failing against. The northern frontier of China faced a persistent strategic problem: nomadic peoples who lived on the steppes beyond the agricultural zone. These weren't primitive tribes. They were sophisticated societies with military capabilities that often exceeded Chinese forces in specific, crucial ways. Nomads had horses. Lots of horses. Every adult male was essentially cavalry, trained from childhood to ride and fight. They could move faster than any Chinese army, strike before defenses could organize, and retreat before retaliation could arrive. Their entire society was mobile, which meant there were no cities to capture, no farms to burn, no fixed targets that Chinese military doctrine knew how to attack. This created an asymmetry that walls couldn't address. A wall is a static defense. It sits in one place and waits for attackers to arrive. Against nomads who could choose where and when to attack, who could probe for weak points across thousands of miles of frontier, who could simply wait for garrison troops to relax their vigilance. A wall was playing the wrong game entirely. The wall had to be defended everywhere simultaneously. The nomads only had to find one gap. And gaps were everywhere. The wall was never truly continuous. Geography made that impossible. Rivers, mountains, and valleys created natural interruptions. Gates existed for trade and communication. Garrison posts required supply routes. Every opening was a potential breach point. Even where the wall was solid, it could be circumvented. Mongol forces famously rode around wall sections, exploiting gaps in coverage or simply traveling through terrain the wall didn't reach. The wall protected some routes while leaving others open. Determined invaders found the open ones. Worse, the wall required constant manning, constant maintenance, constant expenditure. Soldiers stationed on the wall had to be fed, paid, equipped, and rotated. The logistics of keeping the wall operational consumed resources that might have been spent on mobile defense forces. Cavalry that could respond to threats, rather than infantry waiting behind stone. Some Chinese strategists understood this. Throughout history, debates raged about whether wall building was worth the cost. Shouldn't the empire invest in horses instead? In diplomacy? In subsidies that kept nomads peaceful? The wall had critics even in dynasties that expanded it. But walls have political advantages that mobile defense lacks. Walls are visible. Walls are permanent. Walls demonstrate that the emperor is doing something about the northern threat. A cavalry force, however effective, doesn't photograph as well. It doesn't become a symbol of civilization. It doesn't reassure citizens the way a massive stone barrier reassures them. The wall kept getting built because it solved political problems even when it failed to solve military ones. The nomads kept coming regardless. Let's talk about specific failures. The wall's greatest hits of not working. The Mongol conquests of the 13th century represent the most famous breach. Genghis Khan and his successors didn't just get past the wall. They conquered all of China, establishing the Yuan dynasty that ruled for nearly a century. The greatest nomadic threat in Chinese history treated the greatest defensive structure in Chinese history as a minor obstacle. How? Multiple ways. The Mongols exploited gaps in wall coverage, routing armies through mountain passes and desert tracts that the wall didn't protect. They besieged and captured fortified gates, using siege techniques they'd learned from conquered peoples. They bribed garrison commanders, turning defenders into collaborators. And they simply overwhelmed wall sections with numbers and ferocity that static defenses couldn't match. The wall's defenders weren't cowards or incompetents. They were soldiers facing an enemy whose mobility and coordination exceeded anything the wall was designed to stop. The Mongol military machine was the most effective fighting force of its era. Walls didn't stop it. Nothing stopped it until internal Mongol politics and overextension finally slowed its expansion. 3 centuries later, the Ming Dynasty, the same dynasty that built the impressive stone walls tourists visit today, fell to invaders who barely had to fight the wall at all. The Manchu conquest of 1644 is almost embarrassingly simple. A Ming general named Wu Sangui, commanding the crucial Shan-Ai Pass where the wall meets the sea, was facing a peasant rebellion that had captured Beijing. Rather than fight the rebels alone, Wu opened the gates and invited the Manchu army through. The wall didn't fall. It was opened by a Chinese general making a political calculation. The Manchus marched through Shan-Ai Pass, defeated the rebels, and then, surprise, didn't leave. They established the Qing dynasty, which would rule China until 1912. The wall, fully intact, perfectly functional, simply became irrelevant when the people guarding it decided to let the invaders in. This pattern repeated throughout history in various forms. The wall was only as reliable as the soldiers manning it, and soldiers have human motivations: ambition, fear, greed, divided loyalties. Walls don't account for psychology. They assume defenders will defend. When that assumption fails, stone becomes decoration. Even when breaches weren't political, they were often economic. The wall had gates for trade, because China couldn't completely isolate itself from the steppe economy. Nomads had goods China wanted: horses, furs, livestock. China had goods nomads wanted: silk, tea, grain, manufactured items. Trade required openings. Openings required guards. Guards could be bribed. Smuggling across the wall was constant, endemic, practically institutionalized. The same routes that moved trade goods could move armies if the political situation shifted. The wall was permeable by design, because complete closure was economically impossible. The choice was never impenetrable wall or no wall. It was somewhat permeable wall with significant costs or different strategy entirely. Framed that way, the wall looks less like military necessity and more like expensive performance. Here's something the tourist brochures don't mention. The Great Wall was an extremely effective tax collection mechanism. To build the wall, you needed labor. Labor came from conscription. Conscription required census records, administrative infrastructure, the ability to track where people lived and compel them to work. The wall's construction forced the state to develop bureaucratic capabilities that served purposes far beyond defense. Once built, the wall required supply. Garrison soldiers needed food, weapons, clothing, equipment. These supplies came from somewhere, which meant taxation, requisition, the entire apparatus of extracting resources from agricultural populations. The wall created justification for taxes that might otherwise face resistance. We need grain for the northern garrisons is a more compelling argument than we need grain for the imperial treasury. The wall also controlled movement in ways that facilitated taxation. Gates and passes became choke points where trade could be monitored, tariffs collected, smuggling interdicted. The wall wasn't just keeping nomads out. It was keeping track of what moved across the frontier and ensuring the state got its cut. This economic function helps explain why walls kept getting built even when their military value was questionable. The infrastructure of wall maintenance was the infrastructure of state power. Emperors who invested in walls were investing in their own administrative capacity. The defense justification was convenient, perhaps even sincere, but the benefits extended far beyond security. Consider the garrison system. Soldiers stationed on the wall weren't just defenders. They were settlers, farmers, a permanent Chinese presence in frontier regions. Military colonies along the wall grew food, established markets, extended imperial control into territory that might otherwise remain ambiguously governed. The wall anchored colonization. Local economies grew up around wall infrastructure. Towns formed near major gates. Merchants established trade networks that followed garrison supply routes. The wall created economic geography, shaping where people lived and how they made livelihoods. Removing the wall would have disrupted communities that depended on its existence. None of this made the wall militarily effective, but it made the wall economically and politically entrenched. Dynasties that might have preferred different defensive strategies faced constituencies invested in wall-based systems. The bureaucrats who administered wall construction, the merchants who profited from wall trade, the communities that existed because of wall infrastructure. All had reasons to support continued building regardless of whether the wall actually stopped invasions. Institutional momentum is powerful. Once you've built a massive system, employed thousands of people to maintain it, organized your frontier policy around its existence, questioning whether it works becomes almost impossible. The system perpetuates itself. The wall built more wall because that's what wall-building systems do. This isn't unique to ancient China. Large infrastructure projects everywhere tend to justify themselves to create stakeholders who benefit from continuation regardless of original purpose. The Great Wall was just doing it on an especially grand scale. The wall was theoretically defended by hundreds of thousands of soldiers stationed in watchtowers and garrisons along its length. In practice, many of these positions were paper assignments, slots that existed in records but not in reality. Corruption was endemic. Military commanders exaggerated troop numbers to claim extra rations and pay, pocketing the difference. Soldiers existed on paper who had never enlisted, their salaries diverted to officers. Actual defenders were often underfed, under-equipped, demoralized by a system that treated them as accounting entries rather than warriors. The phantom army problem plagued Chinese military administration for centuries. Inspectors sent to verify garrison strength found far fewer soldiers than records indicated. Reports filtered up through bureaucratic chains that incentivized optimism and punished honesty. By the time information reached decision-makers, the picture bore little resemblance to reality. This meant wall defense was perpetually understaffed. The impressive length of the wall required defenders spread thin across thousands of miles. When actual numbers fell short of official counts, the thinness became critical. Sections that should have had dozens of soldiers might have a handful. Watchtowers that should have been alert were empty or manned by soldiers too few to resist serious attack. Supply corruption compounded the problem. Grain allocated for garrisons disappeared into private hands. Weapons meant for wall defenders found their way to markets. The logistics of maintaining frontier defenses created opportunities for graft at every stage, and those opportunities were enthusiastically exploited. Soldiers who actually served often went unpaid for months. They deserted. They mutinied. They collaborated with the very nomads they were supposed to stop, finding smuggling more profitable than soldiering. The wall was defended by men with every incentive to subvert the system they represented. None of this was secret. Reformers repeatedly identified corruption as undermining wall defense. New systems were implemented, inspections conducted, punishments administered. And then the corruption resumed because the structural incentives hadn't changed. As long as distance separated frontier garrisons from central oversight, as long as records could be falsified, as long as underpaid officials faced temptation without accountability, corruption was rational. The wall's failure wasn't just about nomad capabilities or strategic asymmetries. It was about the impossibility of maintaining integrity across a system too large to monitor. The wall required honest administration to function. Honest administration required conditions the wall's scale made impossible. Every stone in the wall represented someone's labor. And somewhere along the chain of command, someone was stealing the money meant to feed the laborers. The wall was built on corruption as much as corpses. The Great Wall stopped working as defense, if it ever truly worked, centuries ago. The last dynasty to seriously maintain it, the Ming, fell despite it. The Qing who followed ruled both sides of the wall and had no need for frontier fortification. The wall became a ruin, stones carted off by farmers for building materials, sections crumbling into the landscape. And yet the wall became China's most famous symbol, recognized worldwide, a shorthand for Chinese civilization itself. How does a failure become a symbol of achievement? Partly through selective memory. The wall's military record is complicated, ambiguous, full of breaches and failures, but also full of moments that look like success if you squint. Times when the wall slowed raiders. Times when garrison responses prevented deeper incursions. Times when the wall's existence shaped nomad strategy even if it didn't stop nomad armies. From this mixed record, you can construct a narrative of success if success is what you're looking for. Partly through scale. The wall is simply enormous and human psychology responds to enormity. Whatever its function, the wall represents an achievement of coordination, labor, and ambition that few structures can match. Size becomes its own argument. How can something so big be a failure? The logic is flawed but emotionally compelling. Partly through nationalism. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as China faced foreign imperialism and internal fragmentation, the wall became a symbol of national resilience. The wall represented China's ability to undertake great projects, to defend its civilization, to persist through millennia. Never mind that the wall failed to stop foreign conquest. It represented the aspiration to resist, which was symbolically useful even when historically inaccurate. Modern tourism completed the transformation. The wall was restored, rebuilt in places, made photogenic. Visitors from around the world came to walk on it, photograph it, experience it as a world wonder. The wall became China's most recognizable landmark, its image on currency and advertisements, its sections groomed for cameras rather than cavalry. The functional wall, the crumbling, undermanned, frequently breached defensive system, disappeared into this symbolic wall. History simplified into iconography. The millions who died building it became background to the majesty of what they built. The invasions that succeeded despite it were footnotes to the general narrative of ancient Chinese greatness. This isn't unique to the Great Wall. Most historical monuments undergo similar transformations, their complicated pasts smoothed into simple stories. The pyramids were built by forced labor for rulers' vanity. They symbolize human achievement. The Colosseum was a death factory. It represents Roman engineering. We decide what monuments mean, and we decide based on what we need them to mean now. The Great Wall means Chinese civilization. It means persistence. It means the human capacity to reshape landscapes. It doesn't mean effective border security. History is inconvenient that way. The Great Wall has lessons for the present, if we're willing to learn them. Expensive defensive projects often serve psychological and political purposes more than practical ones. They make populations feel protected. They make leaders look decisive. They create jobs, move money, demonstrate that something is being done about scary threats. Whether they actually address those threats is secondary, perhaps even irrelevant to their symbolic function. The term security theater describes this phenomenon in modern contexts. airport procedures that inconvenience travelers without meaningfully improving safety, border barriers that can be climbed, tunneled under, or walked around, surveillance systems that collect data nobody analyzes, the appearance of security substituting for the reality. The Great Wall was security theater on a civilizational scale. It demonstrated imperial commitment to frontier defense. It employed millions. It extracted taxes and organized territory. It provided a visible, tangible answer to the question, what are you doing about the northern threat? That the answer didn't actually solve the problem mattered less than having an answer to give. This isn't to say the wall was purely cynical. Most of its builders probably believed in its defensive value. But belief doesn't guarantee effectiveness. You can sincerely invest in solutions that don't work. You can maintain failed systems for generations because admitting failure is politically impossible. You can keep building walls because that's what your institutions know how to do. Modern parallels aren't hard to find. Walls remain popular responses to complex challenges, despite evidence that walls rarely address root causes. The appeal is understandable. Walls are concrete, visible, satisfying in a way that complicated policy solutions aren't. Build a wall is a sentence anyone can understand. Address the economic and political factors driving migration is a white paper no one will read. The Great Wall teaches us that this appeal is ancient, that humans have always preferred visible solutions to effective ones, that the monuments we build say more about our psychology than our problems. We want to see our security. We want barriers we can photograph. We want the reassurance of stone between us and whatever we fear. The nomads rode around. They always do, in one form or another. Threats adapt. Walls don't. But we keep building them anyway. Because building walls feels like doing something. And in uncertain times, the feeling of action is almost as valuable as action itself. The Great Wall stands as a monument, not to Chinese defense, but to human nature. Our need to respond to fear with construction, our willingness to invest in symbols, our capacity to mistake effort for result. 13,000 miles of lesson crumbling slowly into the hills. You wake up in chains. This is not a metaphor. The cell is cold, damp, and smells like something between mold and despair. You've been here 3 days, or maybe 4. It's hard to tell when sunlight becomes a memory. The charges against you were probably legitimate, possibly exaggerated, definitely irreversible. Theft, debt, a minor rebellion, speaking when you shouldn't have. The specifics matter less than the verdict. You've been sentenced to the salt mines. In medieval Europe, this was not a prison term with an end date. It was a death sentence delivered slowly underground, one lungful at a time. The courts didn't call it execution. That would require paperwork, ceremony, certain administrative honesty. Instead, they called it labor. You would work until you couldn't, and then you would stop being a problem. The guards come for you before dawn. Not that you'd know it's dawn. The only light is a single torch, flickering against walls that weep with moisture. They don't bother explaining where you're going. Everyone knows. The mines have a reputation that travels faster than any official decree. You're marched through corridors, upstairs, into a courtyard where a wagon waits. Other prisoners are already loaded, thin, hollow-eyed, silent. Nobody makes conversation. There's nothing to say that the situation doesn't already communicate. You climb aboard, the chains clinking against wood, and the wagon lurches forward. The journey takes most of the day. You pass through villages where people stop to stare, not with sympathy, but with the detached curiosity reserved for the already dead. Children point. Mothers pull them away. A dog barks at the wagon and then loses interest. You are cargo now. Interesting only until you're not. By late afternoon, the landscape changes. Hills rise. The road narrows. And then you see it. Not the mine itself, but the entrance. A dark mouth cut into the hillside, framed by timber that looks older than anyone alive. Smoke rises from nearby buildings. Workers move in the distance, their motions slow, mechanical, defeated. The wagon stops. Guards unlock your chains from the transport and reattach them to a longer line connecting all the prisoners. You're led toward the entrance in a shuffling procession, the ground beneath your feet transitioning from dirt to rock to something that crunches faintly. Salt. You're already walking on it. The air changes as you approach the opening. Cooler. Drier, with a faint mineral taste that settles on your tongue and doesn't leave. You take a breath, and somewhere deep in your chest, something tightens. Welcome to the rest of your life, however long that turns out to be. The first thing you notice is the darkness. Not ordinary darkness. Not the darkness of a room at night or a forest without moonlight. This is absolute. The kind of darkness that has weight, that presses against your eyes like a physical substance, that makes you question whether you still have the ability to see at all. Torches appear at intervals along the descent, but they do more to emphasize the darkness than dispel it. Each small circle of flickering light only reveals how vast the surrounding blackness is. You're walking down a carved passage, the walls close enough to touch, the ceiling low enough that taller prisoners hunch instinctively. The angle is steep. Your legs burn. Your chains drag. The descent takes longer than seems possible. Minutes stretch. The temperature drops, then stabilizes at something cool but not freezing. The earth maintaining its own climate, indifferent to seasons above. The air grows drier with every step, pulling moisture from your lips, your nostrils, your throat. You swallow and taste salt. Other prisoners cough ahead of you. The sound echoes strangely, bouncing off walls that seem to absorb and multiply it simultaneously. Someone stumbles. The chain pulls. Everyone adjusts. The procession continues. You pass openings in the walls, side tunnels branching into deeper darkness, some with faint sounds of distant labor, others silent as tombs. The mine is a labyrinth, you realize. Centuries of excavation have carved a subterranean world that no single person fully knows. Men have gotten lost down here. Men have died down here, their bodies discovered weeks later, or never at all. The guards don't seem concerned. They've made this walk 1,000 times. Their torches bob ahead of the prisoner line, their footsteps confident on ground they know intimately. For them, this is routine. For you, it's a descent into something that feels less like a workplace and more like a digestive system. The earth swallowing you whole. Finally, the passage opens into a larger chamber. The ceiling recedes into darkness above. The walls spread apart. And in the torchlight, you see it for the first time. The salt itself. It glitters. Everywhere. The walls are crystalline, catching the flame and throwing it back in patterns that would be beautiful if the context were different. White and gray and pale pink, layered in striations that record millennia of geological patience. You're standing inside something ancient, something that existed before humans, before language, before anything you'd recognize as life. And you're here to tear it apart with hand tools. A foreman steps forward. He's shorter than you expected, weathered, with a voice like gravel scraping stone. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't welcome you. He simply points toward a pile of equipment, pickaxes, shovels, baskets, leather bags, and begins assigning. You're handed a pickaxe. The handle is smooth from generations of desperate hands. The head is chipped, functional, heavy enough that your arms already ache imagining the work ahead. The foreman gestures toward a tunnel. Your tunnel now. Your section of eternity to carve away, one swing at a time. Down here, the sun is a rumor. And you are about to become very familiar with the dark. The first swing of the pickaxe teaches you something important. Salt is not soft. You'd imagined it differently. Table salt is granular, delicate, the kind of thing that dissolves on your tongue. But this is rock. Compressed over millions of years into something harder than you expected, more resistant, more indifferent to your efforts. The pickaxe bites into the wall and comes away with a chip the size of your thumbnail. Your arms shudder from the impact. Swing again. Another chip. Your shoulders begin to burn. The other prisoners work alongside you, spread across the chamber in a ragged line. Nobody speaks. The only sounds are the rhythmic crack of metal on mineral, the scrape of shovels gathering fragments, the occasional grunt of exertion or pain. Communication happens through gesture, through glance, through the shared understanding of people trapped in the same hell. You learn the rhythm quickly because you have no choice. Swing, chip, gather. Swing, chip, gather. Fill the basket. Drag the basket to the collection point. Return. Repeat. The foreman watches from a ledge above, counting output, noting speed, saying nothing unless production drops. The quota is impossible. You understand this within the first hour. The amount of salt they expect you to extract in a day would exhaust a healthy man with proper tools and adequate rest. You are none of those things. But the quota doesn't care about your limitations. It only cares about numbers. Miss the quota and you lose food. Miss it repeatedly and you lose more than that. The punishments aren't explained in detail. They don't need to be. The older prisoners carry the explanations on their bodies. scars, missing fingers, limps that speak of bones that healed wrong or didn't heal at all. You swing harder. The salt chips away, slowly, grudgingly, as if resenting your intrusion into its ancient silence. By midday, though there's no way to actually know it's midday, no sun to mark the passage, only the foreman's arbitrary announcement. Your hands are bleeding. The pickaxe handle has worn through skin you didn't know was vulnerable. Blisters form, break, reform. The salt gets into the wounds. It burns with a clean, mineral fire that makes your eyes water. You keep working. What else is there to do? The salt dust is everywhere now. It coats your clothes, your hair, your face. It settles into the creases of your skin and doesn't wash away because there's nothing to wash with. You breathe it in with every breath, feel it coating your throat. Taste it constantly. Not the pleasant saltiness of seasoned food, but something rawer, more aggressive, like the earth is trying to preserve you from the inside. Other prisoners cough. Wet, rattling sounds that echo off the crystalline walls. The old-timers cough worst of all, their lungs decades into a losing battle with the air itself. You'll sound like that eventually. Everyone does. A bell rings somewhere in the darkness. The foreman calls a halt. You lower your pickaxe with arms that tremble from exhaustion, muscles you didn't know you had screaming their objection. Rest period. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Enough time to sit against the wall, drink whatever water they provide, eat whatever food they allow. Not enough time to recover. Not even close. But you take it anyway. You sit in the salt-white darkness, breathing salt-thick air, and try to remember what sunlight felt like. It's getting harder to recall. Let's talk about what's happening inside your chest. Every breath you take down here contains salt particles. Microscopic crystals suspended in the air, invisible to the eye but very much present to the lungs. They enter with each inhalation, settle into the delicate tissue of your airways and begin, slowly, patiently, to accumulate. The human lung isn't designed for this. It's designed for air, for oxygen and nitrogen and the occasional pollen grain. It has defenses against particulates, mucus, cilia, the cough reflex. But those defenses evolved for occasional threats, not constant assault. The salt mine doesn't care about your evolutionary adaptations. It simply keeps filling the air with more salt than your body can clear. The first weeks, you notice a persistent cough. Dry at first, then productive. Your lungs trying to expel what they can. You spit and the saliva is gritty, mineral, wrong. The old-timers nod knowingly. They remember this stage. They've moved beyond it. The longer you stay, the worse it gets. The salt particles accumulate in the tiny air sacs where oxygen exchange happens. They cause irritation, then inflammation, then scarring. The medical term is pneumoconiosis, a category of lung diseases caused by inhaling mineral dust. Salt miners develop their own variant. Their lungs slowly stiffening, slowly losing capacity, slowly filling with tissue that used to be functional. You can hear it in the breathing of men who've been down here for years. The wheeze, the rattle, the struggle to draw air through passages that are narrowing month by month. Some men develop what the miners call salt lung, a constant shortness of breath, a grayish pallor, a gradual suffocation that takes years to complete but starts almost immediately. There is no treatment. There is no prevention beyond not being here, and that option was removed when the judge pronounced sentence. You breathe because you must. You work because they make you. And with every swing of the pickaxe, you release more particles into the air that is slowly, methodically killing you. The cruelest part is the invisibility. You can't see the damage happening. You can't feel the crystals settling. By the time symptoms become undeniable, the process has been underway for months or years. The miners who survive longest are simply the ones whose lungs happen to resist a little better, whose bodies bought them time they didn't choose to spend. Some nights, though night is meaningless down here, you lie in your bunk and listen to the breathing around you. The coughs, the wheezes, the sounds of bodies losing a war they never enlisted to fight. You add your own cough to the chorus. It's become automatic now, a reflex you barely notice. Your lungs are trying to save you. They'll keep trying until they can't anymore. The salt doesn't negotiate. It just waits. In the deepest reaches of the mine, in chambers carved by generations of condemned hands, something impossible exists. Not just tunnels, not just work sites, something beautiful. They call it the chapel. You hear about it before you see it. Whispered references from miners who've been down here long enough to know the layout to have earned or bribed their way into the deeper sections. There's a chapel, they say. Built by prisoners. A church underground, carved entirely from salt. You don't believe it until the day a foreman assigns you to a new section and the tunnel opens into something that stops your breath. The chamber is vast. The ceiling arches high above, disappearing into shadows that flicker with candlelight. And every surface, every wall, every pillar, every decorative element is salt. Carved salt, sculpted salt, salt transformed by human hands into something that belongs in a European capital, not buried beneath a hillside. There are altars. There are statues of saints, their features rendered in crystalline white, their robes flowing in frozen mineral drapery. There are chandeliers, actual chandeliers, carved from translucent salt that catches candlelight and scatters it like diamonds. There are reliefs depicting biblical scenes, the figures emerging from walls that sparkle with embedded crystals. Men built this. Dying men. Men whose lungs were filling with the same material they sculpted, whose hands bled from the same substance they shaped into beauty. Between shifts on rest days, in stolen hours when they should have been sleeping, prisoners carved a cathedral underground. Why? The question doesn't have a simple answer. Faith, certainly. These were religious centuries, and condemned men perhaps needed religion more than most. Defiance, probably. Creating something permanent in a place designed to erase you. Sanity, maybe. The need to do something beyond mere survival to make meaning in a meaningless situation. But standing there, looking at what generations of the condemned created, you understand something else. This chapel isn't just for God. It's evidence, proof that humans passed through here and refused to be only victims. That they took the material of their destruction and made it beautiful. That even in a place designed to grind people into nothing, people insisted on being something. The chapel is still used. Guards permit services, perhaps because even they sense something sacred in the space. Perhaps because religion keeps workers docile. Prisoners gather in the carved pews, sing hymns that echo off crystalline walls, pray to saints made of the same salt that fills their lungs. You attend when you can. Not because you're particularly devout. Faith is hard to maintain in a place like this, but because the chapel is the only beautiful thing in your world now. The only reminder that humans are capable of more than suffering. The men who carved it are dead. They died down here, most of them their names unrecorded, their graves unmarked. But the chapel remains. It will remain long after you're gone too. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that was always the point. Even in hell, there are ranks. You learn this quickly. The salt mine operates on a social structure as rigid as any medieval court, just built on different foundations. At the bottom are the new arrivals, disoriented, weak, assigned the worst sections and the hardest quotas. You started here. Everyone starts here. Above them are the survivors. Men who've lasted months or years, who've learned the tricks, who've earned slightly better positions through endurance or cunning. They know which foremen can be bribed, which tunnels have easier salt, which guards look the other way. Information is currency down here, and they've accumulated enough to buy small advantages. Above them are the specialists. Carvers who shape the decorative elements, engineers who shore up unstable tunnels, men with skills valuable enough to warrant protection. They eat better, work less, die slower. The chapel artists came from these ranks. Men whose talents bought them time to create something beyond mere extraction. At the top, just below the guards themselves, are the trustees. Prisoners who've been here so long they've become part of the administration. They count output, assign sections, report infractions. Other prisoners hate them with a purity reserved for traitors. But hatred doesn't change the hierarchy. It just confirms it. The guards stand apart, of course. They go home at the end of their shifts, breathe clean air, see sunlight. They're not prisoners. They're employees. But even they operate within constraints. The mine has quotas to meet, superiors to satisfy, economics that override individual cruelty or kindness. You navigate this structure the way everyone does, carefully. You trade when you can, defer when you must, keep your head down in the presence of those who can hurt you. Friendships form, tenuous, practical, based on shared sections, shared languages, shared sentences. Enemies form too, over stolen food, personal slights, the 1,000 small frictions that confinement breeds. Violence exists, but it's rarely spectacular. More often, it's a shove in a dark tunnel, an accident with a tool, a failure to warn about unstable ceilings. Men disappear without explanation, and nobody asks questions. The mine has its own justice system, operating alongside and beneath the official one. You learn to read the politics the way you learn to read the salt. By observation, by mistake, by surviving long enough to understand patterns. Every interaction carries weight. Every favor creates debt. Every alliance could become betrayal if circumstances shift. This is society, stripped to its bones. Cooperation and competition, trust and suspicion, all compressed into tunnels where daylight never reaches. Humans build hierarchies even while being destroyed. Maybe especially then. Deep in the mine, where the oldest tunnels reach, there are lakes. You don't believe it when you first hear about them. Lakes underground? In a salt mine? It sounds like a fever dream, a hallucination born from too many hours in darkness. But the old-timers swear to it, and eventually you're assigned to a section deep enough to see for yourself. The water is ancient. Older than the mine, older than the civilization that dug it. It seeped through rock over millennia, dissolved salt as it traveled, pooled in chambers that had never seen light until humans arrived with their torches in their need. And it glows. Not literally, not bioluminescence or magic, but the salt content is so concentrated that the water is nearly saturated, dense enough that light behaves strangely on its surface. Torchlight hits the water and scatters, reflects off suspended crystals, creates an effect that looks like luminescence even though it's just physics. The water appears to emit light from within. You stand at the edge of an underground lake, torch raised, and stare at something that looks like it belongs in a different world. The surface is still. No wind down here to create waves. And the reflection is so perfect that you can't tell where water ends and cavern begins. It's beautiful in a way that feels wrong, given the context. Beauty shouldn't exist in a place like this. The lakes serve practical purposes. They're water sources, of course, though the salt content makes them undrinkable without treatment. They mark the boundaries of excavation. Dig too far in the wrong direction and you'll flood tunnels that took years to carve. They're navigational landmarks in a labyrinth where everything looks the same. But they're also something else. Sacred spaces, almost. Places where miners come to sit in silence, to stare at glowing water, to remember that the world contains wonders even when that world has condemned you to darkness. The chapel is official religion. The lakes are something older, something that doesn't need altars or rituals. You come here when you can. Steal minutes from rest periods, take wrong turns that happen to lead to the water. You sit on salt-crusted rocks and watch light play across surfaces that existed before humans evolved. It's the closest thing to peace the mine offers. The water would kill you if you drank enough of it. Salt poisoning is not a gentle death. But sitting beside it, watching it glow, you understand why men risked punishment to come here. Some things are worth the cost. Above you, somewhere impossibly far away, the sun is rising or setting. People are living their lives, unaware of the lakes beneath their feet. You've become someone who finds beauty in brine. The mine has changed you. Everything down here changes you. The question that haunts you isn't whether you'll die down here. You probably will. The question is what survives when you don't. The salt mine has been operating for centuries by the time you arrive. Generations of prisoners have descended these tunnels, swung these pickaxes, breathed this air. Their bodies are gone, buried in unmarked graves above ground, or lost in tunnel collapses below, or simply worn away until there was nothing left to bury. Their names are forgotten. Their stories are silence. But something remains. The tunnels themselves are monuments. Every corridor was carved by someone. Every chamber represents years of labor, thousands of swings, lungs full of salt dust. You walk through spaces created by the dead, extend them for the dead who will follow. The mine is a collaborative project spanning centuries, built by people who never met, who spoke different languages, who committed different crimes. The chapel remains. The statues remain. The chandeliers carved from crystal. The altars smoothed by generations of praying hands. The reliefs depicting suffering and salvation. Art outlasts artists. That's always been true. Down here, it's a defiance that borders on miracle. And the salt remains. In royal cellars, on merchant tables, preserving food across continents. The mineral you're extracting will travel to places you'll never see, season meals you'll never eat. Keep people alive who will never know your name. Your labor enters the economy of the living world, becomes invisible, becomes ordinary. Salt from a mine where men died to collect it. This is what survives. The impersonal products of personal suffering. The chapel is an exception, a place where individual artistry left visible marks. Most of what miners produce disappears into anonymity. The salt on someone's dinner table carries no trace of the hands that extracted it, the lungs that deteriorated to provide it. You think about this during rest periods, during the long hours when exhaustion prevents sleep, during the moments of strange clarity that appear in extended darkness. You're contributing to something larger than yourself, not by choice, not heroically, but inevitably. Your labor will outlast you. Your suffering will become someone else's seasoning. There's no comfort in this. It's not a redemption narrative. It's just fact, the way the mine is fact, the way your sentence is fact. But sometimes, swinging your pickaxe in the dark, you imagine the salt traveling upward into light. You imagine it reaching tables where families gather, where meals are shared, where life continues in all its ordinary grace. You'll never see it. But you made it possible. That's not nothing. Even down here, that's not nothing. The cat crosses your path. Black fur, yellow eyes, that particular feline indifference to human concerns. You feel something. A flicker, a hesitation, a tiny voice suggesting this might mean something bad. You're not superstitious. You don't actually believe a cat's color determines your fortune. And yet the feeling persists, inherited from somewhere you can't quite name, lodged in your psychology like a splinter you've stopped noticing. Congratulations. You're carrying medieval baggage. The fear of black cats, the specific, targeted suspicion directed at cats of a particular color, isn't ancient. It isn't universal. It's a product of a specific time and place, medieval Europe, where the Catholic Church decided that black cats were agents of Satan and spent centuries making sure everyone agreed. This wasn't metaphor or mild disapproval. The Church meant it literally. Black cats were demonic. They attended witch Sabbaths. They served as vessels for evil spirits. They were, in the formal language of papal decrees, instruments of the devil himself. Your neighbor's pet wasn't just a cat. It was a potential supernatural threat requiring vigilance, suspicion, and occasionally violence. The consequences were severe. Cats were killed across Europe, not just black ones, though black ones suffered disproportionately. They were burned alongside accused witches. They were tortured to extract confessions from their supposed masters. They were exterminated in campaigns of religious hygiene that lasted for centuries. And then, eventually, the explicit belief faded. The witch trials ended. The Church moved on to other concerns. Nobody in the modern Western world seriously believes black cats serve Satan. But the superstition remains. Diluted, defamed, transformed into a vague unease rather than genuine terror, but present. Black cats are adopted less frequently from shelters. They appear in Halloween decorations as symbols of spookiness. The association between black cats and bad luck persists in cultures that have long forgotten why it began. Tonight, we're tracing how a papal decree became a Halloween costume, how religious terror became mild superstition, how a fear manufactured in the medieval period embedded itself so deeply in Western culture that we still feel its echoes 8 centuries later. The Pope said your neighbor's cat was demonic. You probably don't believe that anymore. But something in you still flinches when a black cat crosses your path. The year is 1233. Pope Gregory IX issues a papal bull called Vox in Rama. It's addressed to the Archbishop of Mainz, and it describes in vivid and horrified detail the supposed practices of a heretical cult in Germany. The document is wild. It describes initiates kissing toads, pale men with ice-cold skin, ritual orgies, and the appearance of the devil himself in various animal forms. Among those forms, a black cat. According to Gregory's account, based on inquisitorial reports of questionable reliability, heretics would gather for ceremonies where a black cat would appear. The cultists would kiss the cat's hindquarters as a sign of devotion to Satan. The cat was either a demonic manifestation or a vessel through which the devil received worship. This was official church doctrine now. The Pope himself had declared black cats associated with devil worship. The papal seal transformed rumor and prejudice into religious law. Vox in Rama wasn't primarily about cats. It was about heresy, about establishing the Inquisition's authority, about creating a framework for prosecuting religious deviance. The cat was a detail in a larger document. But details have consequences. Once the church officially linked black cats to Satanism, that link entered the cultural vocabulary. Subsequent witch trials incorporated cats as standard elements. Accused witches were interrogated about their feline companions. The presence of a cat, especially a black one, became evidence of diabolical association. Cats were named in confessions extracted under torture, identified as familiars, who helped witches perform their malevolent magic. The familiar concept was crucial. Medieval demonology held that witches couldn't work alone. They needed supernatural assistance provided by Satan. These familiars took animal forms: cats, dogs, toads, ravens. But cats dominated the imagery, and black cats dominated among cats. The stereotype crystallized. Why black specifically? The answers are multiple and overlapping. Black was already associated with darkness, evil, death. The color symbolism predated the cat association. Black cats were also relatively common and relatively visible at night when suspicious activities supposedly occurred. And once the association existed, confirmation bias did the rest. People noticed black cats at witch trials because they expected to see them. Gregory IX probably didn't intend to create a centuries-long superstition about household pets. He was fighting heresy, establishing authority, doing the political work of a medieval pope. The black cat was a rhetorical detail, vivid and memorable, the kind of specific image that sticks in minds. It stuck. 800 years later, it's still sticking. The Pope has been dead for nearly 8 centuries. The heretics he feared have been dead almost as long. The Inquisition is a historical memory. But the black cat still carries the weight of his words. The consequences of Vox and Rama and subsequent anti-cat theology weren't abstract. They were measured in bodies. Across medieval Europe, cats were killed in numbers impossible to accurately count. They were burned in public ceremonies. They were thrown from towers during festivals. They were tortured as part of witch trials, killed alongside their accused owners. The violence was systematic, widespread, and religiously sanctioned. Some of this predated Gregory's papal bull. Cats had faced suspicion and periodic persecution before 1233. But the papal endorsement intensified and legitimized existing prejudices. Now, killing cats wasn't just acceptable, it was arguably righteous. You were fighting Satan's agents. You were cleansing your community of demonic influence. The cat screams were the sounds of evil being expelled. The timing couldn't have been worse. In the century following Vox and Rama, as cat populations across Europe declined under systematic persecution, another population was rising: rats. The black rat, Rattus rattus, carrier of fleas which were themselves carriers of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes bubonic plague. The Black Death arrived in Europe in 1347. Over the next several years, it killed somewhere between 30 and 60% of Europe's population. Entire communities were wiped out. The death toll was so massive that it reshaped European society, economy, religion, and psychology for generations. And cats, natural predators of rats, had spent the previous century being systematically exterminated. The connection is disputed among historians. Some argue that cat persecution significantly worsened the plague by reducing predator pressure on rat populations. Others note that the relationship between cats, rats, and plague transmission is complicated, that cats alone couldn't have stopped the pandemic, that many factors contributed to Europe's vulnerability. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Cat persecution didn't cause the Black Death. The plague would have arrived regardless. But fewer cats may have meant more rats, and more rats may have meant faster or wider transmission in some areas. The Church's war on cats might have contributed at the margins to one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. Whether the connection is causal or merely ironic, the juxtaposition is striking. Medieval Europe killed cats because they were supposedly agents of the devil. Then medieval Europe suffered a catastrophe that might have been slightly mitigated by the animals they'd been killing. The devil, if he existed, could hardly have designed a more effective practical joke. The plague didn't end cat persecution. If anything, the social chaos intensified witch hunting and the associated animal violence. People looked for explanations, for someone to blame, for targets that would make the incomprehensible comprehensible. Cats continued to die alongside accused witches throughout the plague years and beyond. By the time the worst waves passed, the cat's demonic reputation was thoroughly established. Centuries of repetition had transformed papal pronouncement into folk belief. You didn't need to read Vox in Rama to know that black cats meant trouble. Everyone knew. It was simply true, the way gravity was true. The cats that survived were the ones that avoided human attention, the ones that hid, the ones that came out at night, which, of course, only made them seem more suspicious. The witch trial era, roughly 1450 to 1750, killed tens of thousands of people across Europe and colonial America. The exact numbers are debated, but the scale was massive. Perhaps 50,000 executions, perhaps more. The majority of victims women accused of consorting with Satan. Cats were implicated in trial after trial. The familiar, that demonic assistant provided by the devil, became a standard element of witch mythology. And while familiars could take various forms, the cat dominated the imagination. Trial records describe cats in exhaustive detail. Accused witches confessed, usually under torture, to suckling their familiars with blood from extra nipples. They described cats speaking to them, advising them, carrying out curses on their behalf. They named their cats Peewacket, Grimalkin, Titty, Vinegar Tom. The cats became characters in an elaborate shared fiction, constructed under duress, repeated until they seemed real. The familiar concept served legal purposes. Witchcraft was difficult to prove. How do you demonstrate someone cast a spell? But owning a suspicious animal was observable, tangible evidence. If an accused witch had a cat, the cat could be cited as proof of diabolical compact. The animal's existence substantiated charges that would otherwise rest entirely on accusation and forced confession. This created lethal feedback loops. Women who kept cats were more likely to be accused of witchcraft. Women accused of witchcraft were more likely to confess to having familiars under torture. Confessions reinforced the stereotype. The stereotype increased accusations. The cycle perpetuated itself for 3 centuries. Black cats faced particular danger because of their established satanic association, but cats of all colors could be implicated. The familiar mythology wasn't exclusively about black cats. It was about cats generally, and about the suspicion that attached to anyone who lived alone outside normal social structures, with animal companions for company. The typical accused witch was an older woman, often widowed, often poor, often isolated. These were women who might naturally keep cats. For rodent control, for companionship, for the practical benefits cats provide. The same circumstances that made them vulnerable to accusation made them likely to own the animals that would be used as evidence against them. When we talk about witch trials, we often focus on the human victims, and rightly so. But the cats died too. Burned, drowned, hanged alongside their owners. Killed as part of interrogations. Destroyed as suspected demons. The witch trial era was a catastrophe for cats as well as people. The violence eventually ended. Enlightenment rationality, changing religious attitudes, evolving legal standards. Various factors combined to end the trial era. The last major witch trials occurred in the 18th century. The explicit belief in familiars faded with them. But the imagery persisted. The witch with her black cat became a cultural fixture, appearing in stories and illustrations long after anyone literally believed in demonic compacts. The fear transformed into folklore. The folklore became costume. Every Halloween witch with a cat on her shoulder carries this history, usually without knowing it. Here's a modern data point. Black cats are adopted less frequently than cats of other colors. Animal shelters have documented this disparity for decades. Black cats stay in shelters longer. They're euthanized at higher rates when shelters face overcrowding. They're passed over by adopters who might not even consciously recognize why they're choosing the tabby instead. The phenomenon is called black dog syndrome when it affects dogs, and black cat syndrome when it affects cats. Various explanations have been proposed. Black animals photograph poorly. They're harder to make appealing in adoption listings where images matter. Black animals may be harder to distinguish from each other, making them seem less individual, less unique. Black cats specifically may carry residual superstition that influences adopter choices without conscious awareness. The superstition explanation is difficult to prove definitively. People don't usually say, "I'm not adopting that cat because I think it's associated with the devil." The bias operates below the level of explicit belief. Someone might feel vaguely uncomfortable around black cats without being able to articulate why. They might not even notice they're avoiding them. But the pattern exists. Black cats die in shelters at rates that suggest something beyond random distribution is at work. The medieval association between black cats and evil, diluted through centuries of repetition, still influences adoption decisions in measurable ways. Some shelters have responded with campaigns specifically promoting black cat adoption. Black Cat Appreciation Day exists. Social media showcases black cats to counter negative stereotypes. The effort acknowledges that superstition, however weakened, continues to affect real animals. This is what cultural persistence looks like. Pope Gregory IX didn't intend to influence 21st century shelter populations. The witch trial judges didn't imagine their familiar mythology would affect adoption rates centuries later. But ideas have momentum. They travel through time in forms their originators couldn't predict. The black cat in a shelter cage is carrying weight it doesn't understand. The potential adopter walking past is responding to associations they can't name. The transaction that doesn't happen, the cat not chosen, the life not saved, is shaped by forces 8 centuries old. We like to think we've outgrown superstition. We're modern, rational, scientific. We don't believe cats are demonic. We don't burn witches anymore. But the numbers tell a different story. The hesitation remains. The flicker of unease persists. And black cats, generation after generation, bear the consequences of decisions made before their species evolved into its current form. Medieval fear, modern body count. The math is uncomfortable. Here's where the story gets complicated. Not everyone feared black cats. Some cultures considered them lucky. British and Irish sailors traditionally welcomed black cats on ships. A black cat aboard meant good fortune for the voyage. Fishermen's wives kept black cats at home, believing this would protect their husbands at sea. The same animal that represented demonic evil in witch trial courts represented safety and blessing in maritime communities. Japanese culture associates black cats with good luck, particularly for single women seeking romance. The maneki neko, the beckoning cat figurine common in Japanese businesses, is often depicted as black, promising prosperity. Scottish folklore considered a black cat arriving at your home a sign of coming prosperity. How do you reconcile these contradictions? The same animal can't be simultaneously demonic and blessed, unlucky and fortunate. The beliefs cancel each other out logically. But superstitions don't operate on logic. They operate on association, on emotional resonance, on cultural transmission that doesn't pause to check for consistency. Different communities develop different beliefs about cats based on different circumstances. And those beliefs persisted within their communities without reference to what other communities believed. The negative association dominated in regions most affected by witch trial theology: Central Europe, parts of Britain, colonial America. The positive associations survived in communities where different traditions held sway, or where practical experience with cats as useful animals outweighed theological concerns. Sailors valued cats for obvious reasons. Ships had rats, cats killed rats. A good ship's cat was genuinely valuable. The luck association might have developed from this practical appreciation. A black cat specifically might have seemed lucky simply because black cats were common, and having any cat was better than having none. The contradiction also suggests how arbitrary superstitions are. If the same animal can be lucky and unlucky depending on where you happen to be born, neither attribution has much claim to truth. The beliefs reveal more about human psychology than about cats. We assign meaning to random things. We notice patterns that aren't there. We inherit associations from our cultures and experience them as intuition. A black cat crossing your path doesn't actually predict anything about your future. But if you've been raised to think it might, you'll notice when bad things happen afterward and forget when they don't. The black cat is a mirror. What you see in it reflects what you were taught to see. Demon or good luck charm. Witch's familiar or sailor's blessing. The cat doesn't care about your interpretation. It's just a cat, doing cat things, carrying human meanings it never asked for. Every October, black cats appear on decorations, costumes, greeting cards, and store displays. They've become symbols of Halloween, as standard as pumpkins and ghosts and skeletons. The association is so familiar it seems natural, inevitable. But there's something strange about it. Halloween decorations are supposed to be fun. They're playful versions of scary things. Cartoon ghosts, friendly skeletons, goofy monsters. They take fears and defang them, make them cute, render them safe for children and parties. The black cat fits this pattern. The Halloween black cat is stylized, often cartoonish, with exaggerated arched back and bristling fur. It's spooky in an aesthetic sense rather than a threatening one. Nobody decorating their porch with a black cat cutout is actually afraid of demonic influence. This transformation is significant. The fear that killed thousands of real cats, that contributed to witch trial executions, that shaped religious policy for centuries, it became costume material. The terror became kitsch. This happens to fears over time. Distance softens them. Generations pass, contexts change, and what was once genuinely frightening becomes quaint, nostalgic, almost cozy. We dress our children as witches because witches aren't real threats anymore. We put black cats on our doorsteps because nobody actually worries about satanic animals. The domestication of fear is a kind of victory. It means the fear has lost its power to harm. The black cat on your Halloween decoration isn't getting anyone killed. The stereotype has been defanged along with the actual threat. But there's a shadow side. Domesticating fear means forgetting why the fear existed. It means losing the history. The person buying a black cat decoration probably doesn't know about Vox and Rama, about familiar mythology, about the cats burned alongside accused witches. They're engaging with an image stripped of its origins. And as we saw with shelter adoption rates, the original fear hasn't entirely disappeared. It's been submerged, diluted, transformed, but not eliminated. The Halloween decoration is playful. The hesitation at the shelter is not. We laugh at the superstitions we no longer consciously hold while still being shaped by them in ways we don't recognize. The black cat appears on our decorations and influences our decisions. We've made it cute. We haven't made it neutral. The medieval fear persists, wearing a costume now. You probably don't believe black cats are demonic. Almost nobody in the modern Western world holds that belief explicitly. The theological framework that produced it has been dismantled, secularized, transformed into something unrecognizable to Pope Gregory IX. And yet, the superstition persists in diluted form. The vague unease when a black cat crosses your path. The Halloween imagery that treats black cats as inherently spooky. The shelter statistics showing black cats adopted less often. The cumulative weight of 8 centuries of association, compressed into a feeling you might not even notice having. This is how culture works. Beliefs don't disappear when their justifications collapse. They mutate, adapt, find new expressions. The explicit theology becomes implicit bias. The conscious fear becomes unconscious hesitation. The ideas travel through time in forms their originators wouldn't recognize. We're all carrying baggage from centuries we never lived in. Medieval assumptions about gender shaped modern workplaces. Ancient prejudices embedded in language shape how we think. And a papal bull from 1233 shapes how we feel about cats with black fur. Recognizing this isn't the same as fixing it. You can't simply decide to stop having culturally inherited reactions. The biases are deeper than conscious thought, embedded in associations built before you were born. But recognition is a start. Knowing where the feeling comes from is different from just having the feeling. The black cat crossing your path is just a cat. It has no knowledge of demonology, no investment in your fortune, no connection to medieval theology. It's doing cat things for cat reasons, indifferent to the weight of meaning humans have placed on its fur color. You're the one carrying the history. You're the one feeling the flicker that doesn't quite make sense. And now, at least, you know why. Pope Gregory IX has been dead for nearly 800 years. His papal bull is a historical document studied by specialists unknown to most people. But every time you notice a black cat and feel something, anything, you're proving that ideas outlive the minds that created them. The cats, meanwhile, remain unimpressed.